It
Okay,
was the
everyone,
moment the
gather around for the
music died,
cake.
the moment my
Yay,
7-year-old's
cake, let's
birthday cake
eat!
sat untouched, and the moment I saw the flashing blue and red lights. My neighbor, Miss Eleanor Vance, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, stood smirking across the fence, having weaponized a barely audible children's party against us. She had won that day. But what she didn't know was that while she was busy enforcing a 2-decibel violation, I was quietly reading the fine print of our forgotten county zoning laws. She took away my joy. I was about to take away her peace. Forever. What happens when a petty rule follower
was about to
finally
change.
meets someone who plays the rules, but better? The neighborhood of Willow Creek was, by design, a picture of suburban perfection. It was a grid of manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and quiet, tree-lined streets where children learned to ride bikes, and the scent of fresh-cut grass lingered well into the evenings. We had moved there for that very illusion, a safe, predictable bubble where life could simply unfold without complication. My family settled into our corner lot with the promise of building a life here. Our home, a charming 2-story with a porch swing, quickly became the hub of messy, joyful, real-life activity. The back patio was where late-night board games were played, and the backyard was simply a sanctuary for our children. Their laughter, often loud and unfiltered, was the soundtrack to our weekends. We paid our dues, kept our lawn respectable, and smiled politely at the annual HOA meetings, believing we were part of a community, not just a collective governed by bureaucratic decree. Then there was Ms. Eleanor Vance. She lived 2 houses down, though her presence felt omnipresent. She wasn't just a resident. She was the longtime head of the Architectural Review Committee, a role that, in her hands, transcended mere guidance and became an instrument of precise control. Every shrub, every shade of exterior paint, every piece of permissible yard decor was cataloged and judged by her meticulous, unblinking standards. To Eleanor, Willow Creek wasn't a home, it was a museum, and our family's vibrant, occasionally chaotic life was an unwelcome stain on her pristine canvas. The tension began not with a confrontation, but with a subtle, chilling escalation of observation. First, the anonymous note about a lawn gnome placement, citing a 4-inch deviation from the decorative guidelines. Then, the passive-aggressive emails about the overly enthusiastic volume of our children playing basketball, which she insisted disrupted the neighborhood's serene harmony. We dismissed these early skirmishes as the harmless eccentricities of a bored, controlling neighbor. But as the day approached for my son's 7th birthday party, a simple gathering of neighborhood kids, Eleanor's scrutiny tightened like a vice. She inquired specifically about the number of guests, the planned hours, and most ominously, the decibel level of the music. We saw it as standard HOA formality. She saw it as laying the groundwork for war. We were about to learn that in Willow Creek, the biggest threats weren't natural disasters or crime, but a single, weaponized rulebook and the neighbor who knew how to use it perfectly. The birthday was coming, and with it, the inevitable public declaration of conflict. The birthday party was the ignition point. It was meant to be pure, harmless celebration. A bouncy castle, a playlist of kid-friendly pop, and 15 shrieking 7-year-olds. It lasted exactly 1 hour and 37 minutes before the siren wail cut through the noise of the limbo rock. The sight of the police cruiser slowly gliding to a stop on our perfectly paved driveway was a moment of profound, cold disbelief. We hadn't been robbed, nor was anyone hurt. They were there for a noise complaint, filed anonymously but carrying the unmistakable signature of Eleanor Vance. The officer, apologetic but firm, presented us with the evidence. A photograph taken from the street showing the open garage door and a time-stamped printout from a decibel meter. Eleanor hadn't just complained, she had meticulously documented a violation of the excessive daytime recreational volume ordinance. an obscure clause in the HOA bylaws that defined excessive as anything over 65 decibels measured at the adjacent property line. The party died a quick, humiliating death. Watching the police explain the necessity of compliance to a crying birthday boy was the final devastating straw. But the true sting came the next morning, delivered by registered mail, a $500 fine from the HOA, citing the noise ordinance violation and adding an administrative fee for emergency community resource utilization, i.e., calling the police. This was no longer about noise, it was about dominion. The scrutiny tightens. The fine was just the opening salvo. Eleanor, emboldened by her successful public humiliation, began a campaign of hypervigilance. Our quiet, predictable life transformed into a surveillance state. Every mundane act became a potential violation. The first major confrontation after the party involved the basketball hoop. It had been up for 3 years, a standard portable model placed far back on our driveway. Suddenly, we received a certified letter stating that the hoop's vibrant orange backboard violated the Exterior Color Palette Guideline 4.B, which prohibited non-earthen or highly contrasting accent colors visible from the street. They demanded its removal within 72 hours or face a rolling daily fine. We attempted to paint it a neutral beige, a ridiculous endeavor, but the HOA response was immediate. The plastic material inherently retains a non-compliant finish. The sheer absurdity of fighting over the sheen of a backboard was maddening. We reluctantly took it down, sacrificing a piece of our family's routine to the HOA's tyranny. Next came the landscaping. We had a beloved mature oak tree on the corner of our lot. Eleanor cited a newly passed resolution requiring periodic trimming of corner lot canopy overhangs to ensure unobstructed street signage visibility. This was a transparent attempt to force us to butcher the shade-giving crown of the tree. When we hired an arborist who stated the current growth posed no obstruction, the HOA simply dismissed the report and imposed a $50 per day fine until the necessary pruning was executed. It was an impossible trap: defy the HOA and accrue thousands in debt, or destroy a beautiful, healthy tree simply to satisfy Eleanor's sense of order. The pressure began to seep into our emotional lives. The continuous low-grade stress of checking the mailbox, glancing over the fence before turning on the sprinkler, or whispering on the back patio became exhausting. We were living not by what was right, but by what Eleanor might perceive as wrong. Our home no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a rented property governed by an unreasonable landlord. The paper trail of power. The fines escalated quickly. $500 for the party, $100 daily for the tree, $50 for leaving the garbage cans out 2 hours too early, citing the pre-scheduled collection material presentation window. We poured hours into compiling counter-evidence, attending board meetings only to be met with stone-faced dismissal, and writing appeals that were summarily denied with boilerplate language. We realized Eleanor hadn't just mastered the rules, she had installed an entire judicial system designed solely to uphold her interpretations. She was the prosecutor, judge, and executioner, all within the confines of the Willow Creek Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, or CC&Rs. We discovered the chilling extent of her power. The HOA had recently granted the Architectural Review Committee, her committee, the authority to issue preliminary violation notices without requiring a board vote, effectively cutting off our ability to appeal until after a significant fine had already accrued. The emotional turning point came during a heated, public meeting. I confronted Eleanor about the sheer unfairness of the tree fine. Her response was delivered with surgical precision. "We operate within the letter of the law, sir. Perhaps if you read the documents as closely as you wish to defy them, you would save yourself a great deal of trouble." That night, something shifted. The frustration curdled into a cold, hard resolve. Her smug challenge to read the documents was an invitation. If she was going to use the letter of the law as a shield and a sword, then I would learn to wield that law better than she ever could. I dove into the stacks of HOA bylaws, county zoning codes, and obscure municipal ordinances, looking for a loophole, a weakness, a single forgotten regulation that the queen of the HOA might have overlooked in her obsessive focus on paint colors and lawn height. I spent sleepless nights cross-referencing the CC&Rs with the local government codes. The answer, when it finally surfaced, was hidden deep within the county's original 1970s land use code, a dusty, antiquated document governing transitional zones. It was a section that Eleanor, with all her focus on suburban compliance, had entirely missed. Our corner lot, due to its boundary with a major utility easement, was classified under a minor exception mixed-use designation M2B. The M2B designation permitted certain home-based commercial activities that required almost no structural modification and, crucially, allowed for noise levels far exceeding the standard residential ordinance. The key lay in the nature of the business. I finally had the perfectly legal weapon. It wasn't a fine or an appeal. It was a business permit. And the perfect place to set up shop? Right along our shared property line, mere feet from Eleanor Vance's meticulously maintained sunroom. She shut down my son's party with a noise complaint. I was about to bring her entire controlled world to a standstill, all while operating entirely within the law.
The day I implemented my revenge was deliberately chosen for maximum impact. It was a Saturday morning, the traditional time for Eleanor Vance to sit on her sun-drenched patio, enjoying the meticulous silence of her controlled environment while sipping her imported coffee. The first sound wasn't loud, but it was wrong. It was a low, industrial hum, a repetitive mechanical drone that cut through the peace of Willow Creek like a rusty saw. This was the sound of the equipment arriving, and I positioned every piece not just on my property, but specifically along the shared fence line, directly adjacent to Eleanor's treasured rose garden and sunroom. The business I had registered under the M2B mixed-use designation was a commercial mobile pet grooming fleet base and maintenance center. The zoning loophole I had discovered allowed for light industrial activity on the transitional easement boundary, provided the primary dwelling remained residential. I didn't have to groom pets on site, I just had to maintain the fleet. And the fleet maintenance, under the county code, included, crucially, daily equipment cleaning and noise-generating preparation before 7 a.m. The operation was simple, yet devastatingly effective. At 6:45 a.m. sharp, the generators for the 3 brightly colored commercial-grade pet grooming vans would fire up. They were loud, diesel-guzzling machines that legally needed to idle for proper pressure stabilization. Then came the mandatory maintenance routine. High-pressure sprayers used to clean out the internal grooming tanks, which produced a continuous oscillating whine that reverberated perfectly off the vinyl siding of Eleanor's house. I was legally cleaning my commercial equipment. I was legally operating a registered business, and I was legally producing commercial noise levels that completely superseded the petty 65 decibel noise residential ordinance. The reaction from Eleanor was instantaneous, predictable, and glorious. The emergency meeting. She didn't call the police this time. She knew that was a dead end. She went straight to the HOA, demanding an emergency injunction against the illegal, unsanitary, and unconscionable commercial infestation next door. The special session was called 2 days later in the community clubhouse, the atmosphere thick with neighborhood curiosity and Eleanor's barely contained fury. The room was packed, most residents drawn in by the bizarre sight of 3 brightly stickered vans parked permanently on my side of the fence, dominating the otherwise uniform streetscape. Eleanor, standing at the head of the table, did not even attempt to conceal her malice. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the murmurs. She presented her case with theatrical outrage, pointing to pictures of the vans and a hastily acquired recording of the morning noise. "This man," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger directly at me, "is in flagrant violation of the Willow Creek CC&R's Section 7A, No Commercial Enterprise Permitted, and Section 4C, Aesthetic Decorum and Vehicle Storage. We have already issued a cease and desist and a daily fine of $1,000. The collective gasp in the room was palpable. The sheer amount of the fine, designed to crush me instantly, was the ultimate display of her raw power. Then it was my turn. I didn't yell, appeal, or beg. I simply presented 3 neatly organized documents, stapled and tabbed. The first was the certificate of occupancy and business license from the county planning department, clearly outlining the permitted use of my address under M2B zoning. The second was a sworn affidavit from a licensed noise abatement engineer who attested that the daily operation, while loud, was perfectly compliant with the county's industrial and commercial noise limits for the M2B designation, which explicitly exempted it from the residential 65 decibel HOA noise rule. The third was a letter from my attorney, a man whose specialty was aggressively defending small business zoning rights, warning the HOA against tortious interference with a legally permitted commercial enterprise. I spoke calmly, looking directly at the HOA board, but my words were meant entirely for Eleanor. "Miss Vance," I began, my voice quiet but carrying, "you enforced the letter of the law to shut down my child's birthday party and accrue thousands in fines against me. I have done the same. The Willow Creek CC&Rs state no commercial enterprise permitted, but this rule is only enforceable if it does not conflict with superior county or state zoning law. And here, the county law is superior." I tapped the zoning document. "This lot is designated M2B. This is a commercial fleet base. The vans must idle. The equipment must be pressure washed. The noise is regrettable, but it is legally protected. Your $1,000 fine is baseless, invalid, and constitutes an illegal restraint of trade. If you attempt to enforce it, my attorney will initiate a lawsuit that will personally target the board members who voted for this action, alleging direct financial damages and punitive penalties." The crumbling facade. The room went silent. The other board members, suddenly pale, looked at Eleanor, the one who had assured her of her legal invincibility. Eleanor's face, usually a mask of haughty control, was twitching with naked panic and rage. She had never been beaten on her own turf with her own weapons. She scrambled, trying to find a counter-argument. "But the aesthetics, the colors, the vans are an eyesore." I simply smiled, pulling out one final devastating piece of paper, the official Willow Creek Commercial Vehicle Decal Policy. The CC&Rs allow for the temporary parking of commercial vehicles provided they are actively used for business and display a valid visible company decal. Mine do. And as for the colors, Ms. Vance, there is no bylaw anywhere in the CC&Rs that dictates the permissible color scheme of a registered, compliant commercial vehicle. My vans are regulation-compliant, bright pink, and electric blue. Eleanor Vance, the architect of endless petty rules, realized in that agonizing moment that she was powerless. She had found a tiny weak spot in the residential armor and used it to inflict maximum pain. I had found a massive gaping hole in the foundation of her entire HOA authority and driven 3 large, loud, perpetually idling commercial vehicles right into it. The power had shifted completely. She had played the law, I had won the law. And now she had to wake up every morning to the sound of my perfectly legal revenge.
The immediate aftermath of the emergency board meeting was a deafening silence from the HOA. Eleanor Vance had not only been publicly exposed as wrong, but legally cornered. The board members, terrified of the impending lawsuit my attorney had threatened, immediately reversed the $1,000 daily fine and issued a formal, though heavily qualified, retraction of the cease and desist order. They couldn't admit their rules were weak, so they simply conceded the unique zoning circumstances of my property. But the real victory wasn't the reversal of the fine. It was the absolute, chilling peace I had finally earned. The mobile pet grooming business operated like clockwork. Every morning, precisely at 6:45 a.m., the 3 diesel generators would roar to life. The high-pressure cleaning sprayers would commence their oscillating whine, a perfect, irritating sound that carried directly into Eleanor's breakfast nook. The routine was legally mandated, necessary for sanitation and preparation, and utterly unavoidable. There was nothing she could do but listen. She tried, of course. Her first attempt was a direct counterattack using the aesthetic guidelines. She filed a detailed complaint that the bright pink and electric blue vans constituted a visual nuisance and grossly detracted from community property values. I simply countered with the county's commercial vehicle statutes. If a vehicle displays proper registration, is actively used for business, and is not structurally unsafe, local aesthetic ordinances cannot supersede its operational necessity. The HOA attorney, already burned by the M2B zoning debacle, refused to pursue it further. The pink and blue stayed. Next, she tried the smell. She claimed the faint scent of wet dog and industrial-strength shampoo was a health hazard. I immediately paid for an independent environmental firm to perform air quality tests, which, predictably, showed 0 contaminants and confirmed that the smell was merely mild residual cleaning agent odor. The report was framed and sent to the entire HOA board. The complaint was laughed out of the committee. Eleanor's desperate last-ditch effort was to attempt to change the very CC&Rs that had empowered her for so long. She petitioned the board to draft a new amendment that would specifically exclude M2B-zoned properties from commercial activity, requiring a 2/3 majority vote from all homeowners. This was the final, critical point of the conflict, and it forced the community to take a side. The community reckoning. The movement to change the CC&Rs inadvertently became the moment the entire neighborhood finally turned on Eleanor. People were tired. They were exhausted by the micromanagement, the petty fines, and the constant feeling of surveillance. My commercial fleet base, while an absolute headache for Eleanor, was, for everyone else, a symbol. It was proof that the rules could be beaten, that the authority could be challenged, and that the silence of conformity was not the only option. Neighbors who had silently suffered their own indignities, the couple fined for the wrong shade of white on their trim, the family who had to remove their gazebo, the retired man who couldn't plant a vegetable garden, began to speak up. The vote became a referendum not on my vans, but on Eleanor's tyrannical rule. When the votes were tallied, the amendment failed spectacularly. It didn't even reach a simple majority, let alone the required 2/3. This was the true public humiliation. The community, her supposed loyal subjects, had decisively rejected her authority. Long-term impact, the price of pettiness. The consequences for Eleanor Vance were devastating and long-lasting, hitting her where she lived, in her peace and her pride. First was the tangible daily disruption. The 6:45 a.m. wake-up call became her normal. She attempted to sell her house shortly after the vote, but the required disclosure of the adjacent commercial mobile pet grooming fleet base and the undeniable noise level immediately drove away serious buyers. Her once pristine, silent sanctuary was fundamentally and legally altered. The Queen had poisoned her own kingdom. Second, the political fallout was absolute. The board, needing a scapegoat and desperate to restore some semblance of normalcy, used Eleanor's failure to handle the M2B situation as justification to strip her of her coveted Architectural Review Committee chairmanship. She was permanently sidelined, reduced from the powerful gatekeeper to just another resident. Her influence evaporated overnight. For us, the homeowners, the long-term consequences were complex but ultimately satisfying. The constant threat was gone. We operated the fleet base for 6 months, long enough to ensure Eleanor's defeat was permanent and irreversible. We never truly intended to run a massive pet grooming business forever. The setup was always purely tactical. Once Eleanor had resigned from the board and the noise had effectively broken her spirit and her attempts to sell, we slowly began the process of de-escalation. I found a buyer for the vans and equipment, a legitimate pet groomer happy to acquire a ready-made, profitable setup. I deregistered the M2B business. The noise stopped, but the memory and the legal precedent did not. My final act was to attend the next general HOA meeting. I didn't speak on policy or bylaws. I simply stood up and addressed the new, chastened board and the nervous community. I pointed out that the only reason I had to start a noisy commercial business next to a residential home was that the HOA had weaponized its rules to shut down a child's birthday party and levy crippling, unjust fines over a basketball hoop and a tree. The rules, I concluded, are supposed to maintain the quality of life, not destroy it. When you use them to bully and control, you invite a response you didn't anticipate. You forced me to fight a battle of law, and in that battle, the weakest link was not my property, but the governing documents themselves. The atmosphere in Willow Creek had changed forever. The silence was now a respectful, communal quiet, not a fearful, enforced one. Neighbors spoke more freely, the fines became rare and reasonable, and the HOA meetings focused on budgets and actual community needs, not on paint chip codes. The powerful takeaway from this epic suburban war remains this: when a petty tyrant uses the rulebook to inflict pain, your only path to true victory is to master that rulebook yourself. Don't fight the rule. Find the loophole, find the superior law, and use its full legal weight to render their entire authority null and void. We didn't just win a fight against a neighbor, we reclaimed our home, our freedom, and the true meaning of community. And every time I look at that fence line, I remember the sweet, sweet sound of 3 diesel engines running at 6:45 a.m. It was the sound of justice, perfectly legal and deeply satisfying.